I am Nahed Kabbani, and this is the Lighthouse for today's viewers. Welcome to our show. Today, I'm happy to have in our studio my lovely lady friend, the lady who gave me a hand first show I started in Access Sacramento. She is part of our family in Access Sacramento, Jeanie Keltner. She has a lot to tell today, but let me introduce her to you. Welcome to our show, Jeanie.
Thank you, Nahed. I didn't realize that I was one of the people who worked on your very first show.
Yes.
And thank heaven for Access Sacramento,
Yes, absolutely.
where we get to talk about all the things that you don't get to talk about in commercial media. Yes. The commercial media that is misleading people so drastically. But
or keep the subject away from media.
yes, let's keep the subject away from media, but let's talk about the content that the media will ignore. Because
so you have TV show also.
I have a show called Soapbox on Channel 17 every Monday night at 8. And sometimes it's an hour long, sometimes it's half an hour. But we try to do two things. We try to cover the things that the commercial media doesn't cover, which are many and fascinating. And then we also try to spread a little of the good news. There's a lot of good news happening in terms of food, in terms of community organizing, in terms of just independent media springing up. And we like to keep those things in the public eye as well. You know, I was an English professor in my paid life at Sac State. And even as an English professor, I was socially aware. And I was at one of the first demonstrations against the Vietnam War in Los Angeles. It took place at Century City. And we went down, I had two little kids, and we brought the little kids in a stroller. And my husband of the time and I went down because President Johnson was flying into Los Angeles. And I saw the police initiate a riot. The police just suddenly, at a signal, plunged into this crowd of innocent people, peace people, and started whacking and yelling, and I was so astonished. Wow. It was quite an introduction to the realities of protest, because I just thought, I couldn't understand what was happening, to the point that I went down the next day to testify in some way to an investigation about it. But I lost my nerve and didn't testify. So I was an English professor, and I taught the English Romantics, who were very political people. That was Wordsworth and Blake and Byron and Shelley, all of whom were political radicals, as well as magnificent poets who, you know, I feel enormously privileged to have had years with those poets. Because very often in my daily life, lines from their works come to me and
become part of your life.
It's part of me, well, because I've said them for 20 years, you know, as I worked. So there I was at Sac State, and it was the 70s. Well, yeah, it was the 70s, and I wrote a book. And the book gave me the idea that when I had my sabbatical, I could go to Paris and define myself not as a professor, which is kind of dreary, but as a writer, which, of course, I admired writers. I was an English professor. I love writers. So I went to Paris, and it took me quite a while to get settled because they had just elected a socialist president, and the rich people who, in the 70s, really controlled most of the apartments. Paris was a city of renters rather than condos or owners. That all changed in the big time 80s, 90s. But at that time, everyone rented. And they would not rent because the socialist president wouldn't let them kick out people who had not paid their rent. So it was very hard to get a place, and I stayed with friends, and it took me 3 months to get settled. And I finally got settled, and I ended up staying 3 years.
Wow.
Do you know Paris, Nahid?
I
passing
didn't
through?
visit, no. Passed through without,
Without
spending
staying?
some time.
Well, you know, there are 2 islands in the middle of the river that runs through Paris, and I lived on one of them.
Wow.
It was in a 17th century house, apartment house, which had 6 apartments and stables in the back, and we were in the reconfigured stables across the courtyard where the poor people lived. Across from me were the really magnificent apartments with staircases bigger than my apartment. And that was a wonderful time of art and just pure pleasure. But when I came home, I realized that we were in the middle of a war in the United States, and it was the war of the Contras. It was the war in Central America. And all around Sacramento, there were little signs saying, "Stop aid to the Contras," and a phone number. Well, I didn't know Contras, and I had just looked at the news slightly, and you know, I don't know if you remember the struggle in Central America had many different groups and many different little countries, and they all had different little alphabets. There was the FSLN and the SMLN and etc. I didn't know who was who. But I called the phone number, and that's when my education began. Because what I realized was that even though it was illegal, according to the Senate, to send arms to the Contras, who were fighting the legal elected government of Nicaragua, they were terrorists of the worst order. They attacked only schools, only undefended sites, and they were all being armed by the US, CIA, against the will of the US Senate.
Wow.
And it, unfortunately, being from Los Angeles, I have a, what should I say, a wheeler-dealer's side. And I thought, aha, guns down, drugs up. And that turned out to be the case. And that was the most shocking thing. It was not just shocking that we were arming the Contras. What was shocking was that the CIA was allowing people to bring huge quantities of cocaine into the United States, which was then distributed through South LA and became the crack epidemic that decimated the black community and is still hurting the black community for years. So it was, but what was interesting was, I mean, I thought that the whole thing was fascinating. Suddenly I'm reading the news constantly, but the news was always coming in on page 17 rather than page 1. And there would be little innocuous headlines like, "The CIA chief admits Contra situation." Nobody would read that. Who would read that? And it would turn out that it was the CIA chief saying, yes, we did allow drugs to be smuggled into the United States. So that whole thing has quite a history, and it does turn out that wherever the CIA has worked, it has aligned itself with the illegal drug traffic because it profits from the illegal drug traffic, and its people connect with these criminals. So that was the beginning of that. So then I became an activist. And that has actually dominated my life since that time.
Your life changed totally.
Totally,
Absolutely.
totally. I formed a group at the school called Compañeros, which means companions or, ominously, comrades. And they were young students we all just started learning more and more about Central America, and there was a very active group in town who now, most of them, are working on the Palestine-Israel issue. You know, it seems to me we go where we're needed in the sense, and Central America kind of calmed it down. Most of the forces of change gained a little, but really lost again, because the money interests are so powerful that they came back, you know, so. But anyway, I stayed political and started a newspaper because People Matter that went for 20 years.
Oh, wow. Your newspaper?
That was. Did you know that paper? Did you ever see it?
I saw it, but I didn't know it's yours.
It was ours. It was a wonderful little paper. It was an all-volunteer operation.
Wonderful.
Nobody was paid except one person who laid it out on the computer. And we put out 18,000 issues every 2 months because our impulse was not to give progressives something to read, because we can go to the web.
Yeah.
There's so much information, you would never be short of information. But we wanted to have something to pass out to people who were caught in the fantasy of the mainstream media.
We still have some people, until now, they prefer to read than to go to the internet, especially the older people.
Oh, yes.
And they like to dig in their way, their own way, not to sit on the computer. Like me, I don't like computer.
I don't like it
I
either.
feel the magazine and the newspaper still needed, even less needed, but needed.
Oh, still needed, because people won't go to the interesting websites without some kind of direction. And I like something to read because I like to read in bed, or I like to read in the bathtub.
In your comfort zone.
In your comfort zone.
And spare time, not to sit like office and work hard to read and look at the
Oh, it's very
phones.
tiring.
Yeah.
But thank heaven for the internet.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it has really put all the information out there. And if you start double checking, cross checking your sources, and you build up a library, a mental library of the people you trust, you know the information you can trust and the information that's sketchier.
Yes.
You
and
know.
no control to hide that information if it is there.
If it's there, it's coming out.
Yeah,
And that's a good thing.
absolutely. So this is just introduction, my viewers.
Because we've got some heavy duty stuff coming.
So we'll have a break and we will be back soon.
You're watching The Lighthouse for today's viewers, brought to you by oneworldforyou.org.
So let's have Jeanie talk about first topic she liked to talk about. Let us know what is
Okay, before I even forget it, Nahid, I do want to tell people, I feel really happy that not only do I have the Soapbox show every Monday night at 8, but I've got a show now on KVMR radio, which comes from Nevada City on the 1st and 5th Wednesdays of every month at noon. Now, KVMR is 89.5, but if you are in many places in Sacramento, it's hard to pick up that signal right now, so you can go online to kvmr.org and listen to that show at noon. We have an hour, and we've had some, well, your show with Miko Peled. We had Miko Peled on our show. We had Allison Weir on our show. We've done a lot about Israel. Anyway, we call it the Under News because, as you can see, I'm fascinated with the stuff they're trying to hide, you know.
Actually, not just trying to hide. Fascinated of things we need to solve it.
We need to solve.
If we need peace, if we need to establish our life, our economy, we need to solve those problems. We cannot close our eyes and say, it's not our business. We are in it and it hurts us.
It is costing us enormously.
Yes, that's the
It's
point.
costing us the whole view of the world. The world hates us. We are one of the most hated countries in the world.
Because we are pushing ourselves in the hard way. And
We're bombing and killing and bombing and
we
killing.
don't have to be there.
No, no, no. It's serving only a few people.
And spend money on that weapon and things.
Okay, we have ruined our economy.
Yes, absolutely.
When they talk about $800 billion for the Defense Department, they're not counting the wars. This is terrible. So I did want to tell people about that show on KVMR, and we do podcast, so you can pick it up on the website as a podcast as well.
We'll have it on
Information.
Yeah.
I hope you'll put that up. Right?
Yes, I will.
Well, so after Central America, I just stayed with. We protested. We worked against the war in Iraq. We worked against the war in Yugoslavia. That That was the first big war that was absolutely unnecessary, that destroyed a little country on the basis of falsified reports, really. Yes, there was a lot of bad stuff happening on both sides in Yugoslavia, but we bombed that little country to pieces for 80 days. And that was the beginning of our really full-blown assault on civilians, really. So we worked against the Iraq War, and you saw how ineffectual that was. 3 million people marched to say no war, and President Bush said, I don't listen to focus groups. Mm-hmm. You know, what an insult, really. The world said no, but the US said yes. And I now believe, as I look back to the structure of things, the war on Iraq was really, it was in part for the US's control of the area, but it was really in response to Israel's need to break down the other powers in the neighborhood. The other powers in the Middle East had to be destroyed and broken into small pieces. And this was a plan that was written out by the people who then became very influential in the Bush administration. We call them the neocons. They were people who had often dual citizenship with Israel, which is very common because Israel welcomes all Jews to be citizens of Israel. So you can be a citizen of this country and likewise a citizen of Israel. These neocons were very important in the administration, and even in 1998, they had written manifestos saying, to make Israel strong, we must take out Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya, and you know we're down now to we only have Syria to go and Iran. So we are acting in many ways, I do believe, as much for Israel as we are. We said the war was for oil, but most oil people would rather have a peaceful country and buy their way in than be in some place that is torn apart by civil war, as Iraq is right now. So Iraq is still suffering from we say we're out of there, but we still have thousands and thousands.
For years and years.
They will never come back.
Yeah, and they are refugees in other countries.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
They are not happy for sure.
Oh,
they need years to settle down, if they could, especially the older people.
What we did in Iraq, what we do is we do take a country that seems to have, as you know, from Islam has many groups. And countries that seem to have found a way for for groups to live together because of perhaps a strong political structure, even an authoritarian political structure, we break up the authoritarian structure, and then we incite enmity between the two groups, and we leave them with civil war. So, when 9/11 happened, I don't have a television, I confess. I have a television show, but no television. I figure it's enough work to do the show rather than to just watch it, but I seem to see whatever I need to see on the web. When 9/11 happened, I went down to my downstairs neighbor and we watched it happening, and I thought, well, of course, we have done terrible things to the people of the world. They're bound to want to get back at us. And we've especially been horrible. At that time, we had had the first Iraq War, and thousands. Remember, I will never forget somebody from 60 Minutes, Diane Sawyer maybe, asking Madeleine Albright, telling out Madeleine Albright, the Iraq War of the first Bush had killed 500,000, the sanctions killed 500,000 Iraqi children. And the interviewer said, do you think it's worth it? And she said, it's harsh, but it was worth it.
Yeah, we created. No need for us for that war.
It was, no.
We created.
We have incited every war that we've been in. So that's where, anyway, So I immediately sat down and said, let's not immediately go to war. We started demonstrating immediately. The peace community here in Sacramento, we were down at 16th and J on the day after, practically. 9/11 was on a Tuesday, and we were probably down at 16th and J by the weekend with big signs saying, you know, don't attack, sort this out. But I now realize that 9/11 happened in order to incite us to war, to give us a reason to go to war. But it was months before I started to, I came across something on the web from a Frenchman. And it was just a little article that said, "Where is the plane? Where is the plane at the Pentagon?" And he showed the pictures immediately after, the first photos that were taken show the firemen with their big hoses, and there's not a piece of plane wreckage on that great big lawn in front of the Pentagon. Not a piece. Not even skid marks. Now, this was a huge plane. Not only that, it showed that the hole in the Pentagon was about this size, with windows above it that were not even broken. Where did the wings go in, which would have come out like that? Well, that started me investigating, and I think it started a lot of people investigating. Where was the plane at the Pentagon? You see a whole crew of white-shirted, black-pantsed men walking down through the fields and picking up tiny little pieces that many people said were not even part of a big plane. The mystery of what happened to the plane at the Pentagon is still unsolved. It is true that Donald Rumsfeld, and this is on tape, he said, he's talking to people a week after 9/11, Army people, and he says, somebody says, "How can you protect against terrorist attacks?" And he said, "It's almost impossible. We couldn't have known that they were going to fly planes into the World Trade Towers or shoot a rocket into the Pentagon." Or maybe he said missile, or shoot a missile into the Pentagon. You know, he's the same. He was a very stupid man, in fact. That's why he always had to repeat. Remember how he always repeated the question that the reporter asked, and he would try to turn it around. But the other thing he said that is also on tape is when they said about the plane in Pennsylvania, everybody said, "Where's the wreckage?" But anyway, he said, "Is that the plane we shot down over Pennsylvania?"
He's not in it.
So, you know, it's like dear old Bush Jr. who said, "Nothing could be farther than the truth." And it's true. Anytime he opened his mouth, nothing was farther than the truth.
Someday, somehow, it will be clear to everybody.
It's
the
day
story,
by day.
Whatever it is, the story, even this way or that way or this way or that way, with the investigation, with the new equipment, with the new technology, things will be clear and easy to show.
Things are already clear, Nahid. Really, they really are. Anyone, I'm a researcher. Mm-hmm. That's how you get a PhD.
Yeah.
You sit and go through books and read and keep notes and put it all together. And so I have been researching for 10 years now. Well, 9 years, because I didn't start right after 9/11, but a year after. And I've read almost all the books about 9/11. I've read constant articles and kept up with the blogs. Anyone who will bother to spend 4 hours reading various sites, and I will give them to you so that you can have them up on your screens so that people can check them out themselves. For example, we'll find it extremely clear, totally obvious, number one, that the official story is not true. That's the most important thing to recognize. We can't say for sure what the true story is. I have many thoughts about that because there's lots of very suspicious evidence. But for sure, the official story is a tissue of lies. And the way it was set up, who ran it, how they edited it from the beginning to the end, and you know what you can always say, the cover-up proves the crime. They wouldn't have had to cover up if they weren't afraid of the truth getting out. So there are so many things that are covered up in that official report.
For me, there's so many things have question mark and unclear. I'm not researchers like you, but,
Well,
but I'm sure our viewers have some people like to search, and we will give you that information.
Oh, yes.
And you will search yourself. And since Jeanie spent her life searching and digging in, maybe we'll listen to her talk and we will learn something, and we can try to prove it ourselves. We don't have to believe.
no, no, no.
We can listen, open mind, open eyes, and you do your search.
It's nothing that we want to know in truth. I call it, it's a phrase from a poem, grievous knowledge. It makes you sad, very sad to think that this could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know there is another story.
Yes.
So we'll have a break and we will hear.
We'll be back.
We'll be back. We'll be back.
oneworldforyou.org, promoting cultural understanding through the media.
Okay, Miss Jeanie, what else?
Okay, so here's 9/11 over here. You know, I've always loved the spy novels of John le Carré, very intelligent British writer who does plots so complicated and so real, and he's really one of us. He's a peace man, and I've loved reading them. And I don't read detective novels, but I have loved those spy novels. But I can assure any viewer that you will have a constant intellectual stimulation if you follow the question of 9/11 in its many directions. You won't have to go to the library for any spy novels because it is a fascinating story. And only to mention this one thing, and that is there's a site called Patriots Question 9/11. And it's filled with aeronautical engineers, architects, architectural engineers, pilots, former heads of state, former CIA and intelligence agents from all over the world, scientists, physicists, on and on, with curricula vitae, you know, lists of accomplishment as long as my arm, who all say, I watched it, I thought, there's something wrong with this picture. I have never seen a plane crash that looked like that with so little evidence. I have never seen, and they come in on various different aspects of the official story, saying the official story doesn't make sense. And I always like to point out that the main flaw in the official story, in the report that this group did, that was run by Condi Rice's second in command, it's important to realize it was an inside investigation, and that Bush and Cheney refused to testify unless they could come together and testify as a duo without anybody taking notes. That's pretty unusual too. At any rate, it talks about the two World Trade Towers, but it never mentions the third building that came down. You can see it. All you have to do is Google Building 7. You'll get it immediately. A 47-story building, taller than any building in Sacramento, that came down like this. Boom, that fast. Only controlled demolition can bring a building down like that. So that means that we don't think that those Arab hijackers could have gotten into the buildings and wired them for explosives. So the new thing to check out, and you can check it out in 9/11 research, and it's not that new, it's been there from the beginning, and that is there are some very suspicious things that were there from the start. On 9/11 day itself, a woman looks out her apartment window in New Jersey across the river and sees the building hit by one plane. But then she looks down, and in the parking lot of her apartment building are three dark-looking men dressed in Arab clothing who are watching what's happening with the World Trade Center towers and are high-fiving each other and laughing. Well, she thinks this is so strange that she calls the police. They arrest them. She gets the license number. It belongs to a moving company that has been connected to Israeli intelligence, Mossad. And the van is stopped on a freeway on 9/11, and in it are 5 men. They say, "We are not your problem. The Palestinians are your problem." Shocking. They have with them fake passports. One guy has 2 passports in his own name. They have $4,700 in cash. The dog that sniffs the van sniffs traces of explosives. They are arrested. They're the only people arrested on that day, and they are kept for 70 or so days, and finally set free through the machinations of the mayor of New York City, who was, I forget who it wasn't Bloomberg at that time. But anyway, so when they asked them, they said, "What are you doing this?" They said, "Well, we wanted to see what was happening, and we were just recording the event." Later on, they show up on Israeli television after they get back to Israel. They are Israeli intelligence agents, and they say, "We were there to document the event." Well, how would they be there to document the event unless they knew the event was going to happen? That was news the very first day after 9/11, and whoop, disappeared like that.
Wow.
Another van was stopped with Israelis, another white moving van. It turns out this man fled the country. The white moving van company was a Mossad front. The man went back to Israel, came back then to the United States. So that's one set of strange happenings. The 5 men, they're called the 5 dancing Israelis. You can Google that too and get a lot of information. So then there's a man now, and I have to admire him. His name is Joshua Blakeney, and that will be up for your screen, who is saying he's a pro-Palestinian activist, as I am, because I have become a Palestinian activist since I've been to Palestine and have seen what occupation, how horrible it is. And I've done my research there too, and I've learned the true story of Israel's founding and what they did to the Palestinians, chasing 700,000 of them out of the country, among them your family. So he is up in Canada, and he is saying we could really help the Palestinian cause if we started talking about the Israeli connections to 9/11. And I don't even want to say Israeli. I want to say Mossad, because I'm sure that the Mossad is to Israel like the CIA is to the United States. And the CIA often has a mind of its own, I'm sure, and does things that our leadership would not approve of. And I'm pretty sure the same is true of Mossad. So Blakeney pointed out to me, and on the website that we will have for viewers, you can go to an article about British intelligence, and this, Nahid, absolutely blew my mind. British intelligence traced 6 Mossad agents. They were Egyptian and Yemeni Jews, i.e. Jews who were born in Egypt or Yemen, who therefore who were Arabs. I mean, Jews are Arabs. We're all Semitic people. Yeah. It's just a different religion. So they obviously could pass as, jihadis. And this group of 6 people were infiltrated into the hijackers' groups that were in the United States, the Arab groups. Some came from Hamburg. Remember, Mohammed Atta came from Hamburg and went from Hamburg to Boston and infiltrated the cell there. And some came from went to Florida and infiltrated, which is where a lot of the quote-unquote Arab hijackers were training in Florida as pilots. Well, we know from information that came from the flight camps where they learned to fly, quote-unquote learned to fly, that the person who was supposed to be flying the plane into the Pentagon, this gigantic plane, was not even allowed to fly a small plane. He was such a bad pilot. So obviously he could, most pilots say you can't fly a plane into the Pentagon because when a plane gets that close to the ground, it doesn't have enough air underneath it to keep it up, and it crashes, you know. So, and we know also that the week after the hijackers were identified, many of them wrote from England and Arabic countries saying, we aren't dead, we're still alive, I'm the person in that photo, and I wasn't on those planes. Nor are there any names of Arab hijackers on the plane's manifests, which is what has all the names of the passengers. So I have to, to doubt the official story, you don't have to be able to say what actually did happen. But we know that what the official story said happened did not happen. And I tend to believe that the hijackers were what is called in intelligence operation, patsies. They were told that they were going to do a terrorism exercise and pretend to hijack planes, and they would somehow be saved. We know that they weren't men who were willing to sacrifice their lives because of their allegiance to Islam, because the main leader was doing cocaine and visiting prostitutes in a strip club in the nights before the planes went down. No one who is going to become a sacrifice their life for a religious reason would act like that.
Yeah.
So we know there's something terribly wrong with that story. There are all kinds of discrepancies in all the stories. It just goes on and on. The day of 9/11, they found Mohammed Atta's passport that had floated down from the inferno of the buildings. Come on, all around was dust. Nothing that you could even pick up, and here's a passport? That's obviously a phony plant. You know, I mean, if we didn't have a complicit media, this would have unraveled long before this, because there are so many mistakes. But we have a totally complicit media. For example, right after 9/11, there was footage on United States television of Palestinians dancing in the streets. And the clip on television said, Palestinians celebrating 9/11. Well, they weren't celebrating 9/11. That was old footage that came from a Hamas political victory. Who put that on and said that was Palestinians celebrating?
Who could celebrate? The whole Arab world, not just Palestinian, become under attack because of 9/11.
We also have to say that Osama bin Laden, in the week after 9/11, came on television and said, I'm sorry that many innocent lives were lost. America deserves retribution, but I didn't do it. He said, my Islamic faith keeps me from being willing to sacrifice innocent victims. I had nothing to do with 9/11. He said, the United States should look within its government to see who did that. Well, you never saw that. And then we have such brutally idiotic things. We have many, many fake Osama videos.
We create. We are creative.
Yes, we are creative. Well, we have Hollywood.
Yeah, we have Hollywood, and we are here too. We learn how to do videos. Who knows what we will do after that?
Yes, maybe I'll put on a long beard and I'll say, I'm Osama bin Laden, come back to life.
So we need a break after those information. We need a break, so we'll be back soon. Wow, I think we like to hear from Jeanie about her visit to Palestine, Israel, and what kind of activities she have after she comes back.
Before I leave 9/11,
okay.
just let me say this. I hope I have stimulated viewers to do some research, number one.
Yes.
And to only say, when people say, but why would that be done? It would be done to invite us into a world of eternal war, because we had no enemies. Now we have an enemy, terrorism, that we can fight forever. And that's what seems to be the plan. And that's why I keep coming back to 9/11, because it is the reason for our military aggressiveness.
Yeah.
So there.
Yeah.
So, but I believe it will come out. I believe that enough people they didn't realize how many people would be grabbed and would be researching this. So, okay, so 9/11, that led me to look more at what was happening in the Middle East. And the more I read about the Middle East, the more I realized that Palestine was getting a very distorted coverage in the United States, and that we were hearing a story that wasn't true. And that led me to do my own research about that. And
one side story, actually.
A totally one-sided
story.
story.
Two side stories.
No.
One side story.
When Israelis are killed in an incident, they have names, they have photos. When Palestinians are killed, they're most often not even mentioned in the news. This latest attack on Gaza, for example, there were 4 Palestinians killed before any rockets went into Gaza on that. And yet, when Israel bombed Gaza, the news said, in retaliation for the rockets. Not that the rockets were retaliation for the killing of 4 young Palestinian boys. So what I found out when I started to do my research on Israel-Palestine is that it's a colonial occupation. It is brutal. It is bloody. It is incredibly restrictive. And so I wanted to be part of we formed a Palestinian sister city organization,
Bethlehem.
A sister city with Bethlehem. It seemed, totally innocuous, of course, to have Bethlehem, where Christ was born, as the sister city. And I was one of the first people to visit on that basis, to go teach writing in Bethlehem to various small groups, and to have the experience of really what I thought was a wonderful culture. The Palestinian culture is a very welcoming, very warm and friendly culture. I had what most U.S. people have, kind of an attitude when I saw Palestinian-Israeli conflicts. My thought was, a pox on both their houses, right? They're both violent people. They're just equal antagonists, Let them destroy each other, almost, get it out of our head. But it isn't it's not 2 equal powers. It's one group of people who is incredibly impoverished, who doesn't even have control over their own water supply. Water in Israel-Palestine is controlled by Israel, so that up on the hill in Palestine, in the area that is supposed to be controlled by Palestine, there are huge cities crowning the hills that are for Jews only, Israeli Jews only, which have swimming pools and water parks and green lawns in the desert. And down below, when you turn on their water, there's just a little trickle, and if you wash your hands, you save the soapy water to throw on the garden. You don't let any water go down the drain. I mean, that's a pretty shocking situation. We're a country that used to, in hot weather, just turn on the water to hear it. We've wasted so much. But impoverished and yet upbeat. They are not going to be taken down by depression. They are using nonviolent resistance throughout many of the West Bank communities, where they just go and bedevil some of the Israeli guards who are guarding areas where they are taking Palestinian land. Every day, more Palestinian land. Every single day, more Palestinian land is taken by Israeli soldiers to either build roads that are used for Israeli Jews only. Literally, Palestinians are not allowed to travel on those roads. to build settlements that are used by Israeli Jews only. And if you are an Israeli Arab, you have citizenship in Israel, not if you're West Bank, but you don't have many rights. It's very interesting. It's a whole structure of oppression that is legally built against the Palestinians. And so it pleases me greatly, really, that this issue is beginning to be much more understood as many more people read and educate themselves through things like the Sister City, you know, where we have many people going now and many people seeing with their own eyes what occupation is like. When Israel, I was in Bethlehem, which is about, I think if you drove directly from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, it would take you 25 minutes. Mm-hmm. But because there are checkpoints, Israeli checkpoints, armed guards and soldiers, and cars lined up to get through, there are 2 or 3 Israeli checkpoints to get to Jerusalem. It takes you an hour and a half. So and many people who live in Bethlehem do not have the passes issued by the Israeli government that would allow them to visit Jerusalem, which is their capital too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they have family in Jerusalem, yes, which they cannot visit. So when I think of it, my heart aches, you know, in a way, really, it's part of my tradition of finding the causes that are most unequal, mm-hmm, like Nicaragua versus the United States, or Palestine versus Israel. You know, we have been fed a mythology through movies that demonize Arabs, that construct a history of Israel that is not true. Mm-hmm. Not true. Israel was founded in terrorism. The Israelis were some of the first and most powerful terrorists in the Middle East. They blew up the British, they blew up Arab sites, and this is information that is coming from Jewish Israeli historians. None of this, the information that I have studied, I made a point of getting from Israeli Jews. I did not want to feel that I was only getting the Palestinian side. Mm-hmm. And you can say with certitude that the Israelis have started every war, even the ones they claim that they did defensively, and that the Israelis have broken almost every major truce. And anyone who wants to understand what the situation is in Israel-Palestine has only to go Google Israel-Palestine maps. And you will see there the classic 4-picture map of Israel-Palestine. In 1948, there's a picture of Palestine, all green. Then the Jewish state was formed, Israel was formed, and I think more than half was given to Israel out of Palestine, even though Palestinians were living there and making their home there for centuries. More than half was given to Israel. And then in every successive map, finally the map of today shows a few little dots that are now Palestinian enclaves in the state of Israel.
And there's walls between.
And walls between. Walls higher than the Berlin Wall.
Well, yeah.
All along the highway.
Yeah. And
the wall between your house, if you're a Palestinian, and your olive field.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the heartbreak, this is terrible to say, it almost hurts me more to see Palestinian olive trees being destroyed, mm-hmm, than Palestinians themselves. 200-year-old trees.
Will they take it off? Yeah.
It's a terrible situation. It really is a terrible situation. And you wanted to have this segment to be an upbeat situation. Well, to me, the good news about the bad news is that the bad news is getting out. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this has to do with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement that came from Palestinian nonviolent citizen action. What can we do that would not be warlike? We cannot buy things from Israel. Mm. And that would be not things made in the territories, like SodaStream. I don't know if people are thinking, oh, I'd like to have that little soda maker. It's everywhere advertised. Don't buy it. It was made on illegal settlement land. The settlements are illegal. It's illegal to occupy a country and bring your own population in. That's illegal in international law. All the wars that Israel has fought are illegal wars and humanitarian assaults on international law. So we are going to have this in the news. This is going to be a very topical question because Obama has nominated a man, Chuck Hagel, for Secretary of Defense, and he has said, I represent the United States, not Israel. This is dangerous. And he's a man who has seen war, unlike our most recent defense secretaries who never went to war. You know, Eisenhower went to war and he said, nothing is worse.
Yeah.
Eisenhower worked for peace when he came back and warned us about the military complex because he saw the suffering of war. Well, let's find a Secretary of Defense who is a Secretary of Peace rather than aggressive war.
Let's help him to be.
Let's help him.
Yes,
right. Let's write our senators.
Do something. Yes.
Yes.
Let's do. People. We are the people who will control more than the government if we want to.
If we want to.
If we understand the situation, and thank you for explaining things. As I mentioned,
it's heavy
in my
sausage.
show, if they are human, we are human rights fighters. We have to fight for their own rights if they cannot.
Yes.
Okay, if we don't see them human as Palestinian, what else I can name them in my show when I talk about Israel-Palestine? What kind of name I can give them to say Israel with those people? Even animals, we treat animals high quality. We have good heart. We are good people.
But we have false pictures.
Yes, we need the good information, the right information. We will act normally.
And we will open our hearts.
Yes, we will act normally because we are good people.
Yes,
and
you're very right.
Have good people. And we are the problem solvers. That's why when we address the issues, to let people know about it, to think how to solve it right.
Yes.
To have peace.
Yes.
We're all for peace.
Yes.
Who doesn't like to live in peace?
You know what Eisenhower said? He said, the people of the world want peace so much that someday the governments will have to get out of their way and let them have it.
Absolutely, he is right. I feel it.
Yes, yes.
So I really appreciate it, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me, Nadia.
I'm sorry that I gave you a chance to talk too much to hurt your throat.
I hope people haven't run from their television in fear. But no, use this information, investigate it yourself.
But it's an open eye, open mind idea that a great teacher given to us. She gave us a great lecture today. We will be graduate from her class today.
You have a PhD in Palestine,
and
Israel.
Have the ability to go and search on our own and find out some kind of right things from what she gave us. And if we find it, we should thank her that she opened our eyes and our mind. Please do your homework. Please work hard a little bit to find that truth in your way. Don't listen to us. Don't believe what we say.
Exactly.
But do your own search. And we have the ability as internet to do our search. And in that matter, I will thank you very much if you do. And if you have any question, call us. We will give you the information on the screen. And Jeanie is ready to answer your calls when you send it to us. With this message, I let you go, and thank you for watching. See you next time.